In 1944, the battlefields of Europe were drenched in blood and dust. German soldiers, once feared across the continent, now lay broken, wounded, exhausted, and surrounded by the advancing Allied armies. They expected punishment, humiliation, maybe even death. But what happened next shocked them beyond belief. This is the untold story of German POWs who couldn't believe how the Americans treated their wounds, and how compassion, not cruelty, changed their view of the enemy forever. It began on the outskirts of Normandy. A group of young German soldiers, barely in their 20s, had been holding a farmhouse when American troops closed in. After hours of shelling and firefights, the Germans finally surrendered. Their faces were pale, uniforms torn, and several men were bleeding badly. They had been told that Americans executed prisoners. That surrender meant certain death. So when American medics arrived, with stretchers and bandages, they froze in disbelief. Inside a dusty field tent, the smell of antiseptic filled the air. American medics worked non-stop, treating wounded, Allied and Axis alike. To them, a wound was a wound, no matter what uniform the soldier wore. Private Harold Stevens, a 22-year-old medic, recalled in his diary, "They were scared stiff. I told them, 'You're safe now. We'll patch you up.' One of them started crying. The Germans expected interrogation. Instead, they got morphine, clean bandages, and warm soup." One German corporal, his arm torn by shrapnel, whispered to an interpreter, "Why? Why are you helping us? We killed your men." The American medic simply replied, "Because that's what we do." For the first time, many of these young German soldiers realized the enemy wasn't the monster their propaganda had described. That night, as they lay on stretchers beside captured Americans, one German soldier reportedly said, "I don't understand. They treat us like humans." Over the following weeks, thousands of wounded POWs were transported to medical camps across France and England. In U.S. field hospitals, German POWs were operated on, given proper meals, and even written letters home through the Red Cross. A former German nurse later testified, "I saw American doctors perform surgery on men who had fought against them that same morning. They saved lives that German doctors might not have." Some POWs began to question everything they had believed. In one powerful story, a captured German officer with a severe leg injury was treated by an American surgeon for over 6 hours. When he woke up, he was told his leg had been saved. He reportedly said, through tears, "I thought you'd cut it off to make me suffer. Instead, you saved me. Why?" The doctor smiled and said, "Because war will end one day. But what we do now stays forever." That line, preserved in war letters, became a symbol of American compassion during World War II. As the guns fell silent in May 1945, a strange stillness settled across Europe. For millions, the war was finally over. But for the German POWs still recovering in American care, it felt like waking from a nightmare. The camps that once echoed with fear now carried a quiet rhythm of rebuilding lives. Wounded men learned to walk again with wooden crutches. Others spent their days writing letters home, words filled not with hate, but with gratitude. In one POW hospital in Texas, a German soldier named Karl Müller had lost his brother during the invasion of Normandy. He was bitter, angry, and wanted revenge, until an American nurse brought him coffee every morning with a smile. Weeks passed. When Carl was finally healthy enough to leave, he told her softly, "You have done more for me than my own officers ever did." She simply replied, "Maybe that's how peace begins." Across America, German prisoners were treated under the Geneva Convention, many living in barracks cleaner than the ruins of their hometowns. They were given books, music, and even English lessons. Some were allowed to work on nearby farms, where American families often invited them to dinner. A farmer in Georgia once wrote in his journal, "They were just boys, scared, polite, thankful. My wife made them apple pie, and one cried because he hadn't tasted something so warm in years." That image, a former enemy crying over a slice of pie, symbolized everything the war could not destroy: humanity. When mail service resumed, thousands of POWs wrote letters to their families in Germany. Many of these letters were later archived, testaments to changed hearts. One letter read, "The Americans treated my wounds and gave me food. They are not the monsters we were told about. If only we had known this earlier." Another said, "They healed us, even as our bombs had destroyed their homes. I no longer know what victory means." These letters, smuggled through the Red Cross, reached German towns, still buried under rubble, carrying a small message of hope from across the ocean. By late 1946, the first groups of German POWs began returning home. They stepped off trains into a world they barely recognized: cities in ruins, families scattered, and the echoes of defeat all around. But those who had been treated in American hospitals carried something different: a quiet respect for the people who had once been their enemies. In post-war interviews, many spoke of the same memory: a hand that helped them when they were helpless. One ex-soldier recalled, "I was shot in the chest, and an American medic risked his life to pull me out. I never forgot his face. He was the reason I never hated again." Years later, some of those former POWs returned to the United States, not as prisoners, but as friends. They met the families of the medics who once saved them, and many became lifelong pen pals. A few even settled in America, opening bakeries, working as teachers, and raising children who grew up never knowing the hatred their fathers once carried. History remembers wars for their battles, but these stories remind us of something far greater: the healing that followed. The wounds of war run deep, deeper than flesh and bone. But sometimes it only takes one act of compassion to begin the healing of an entire generation. For the German POWs, a bandage from an American medic became more than medical aid. It became a symbol that even when nations collide, humanity can still survive. In the decades that followed, some of those same prisoners wrote to American veterans, thanking them for saving their lives. One letter, written in 1961 by a former Wehrmacht soldier, said, "I once swore to fight America, but when your doctors saved me, I learned what honor truly meant." That letter is now preserved in a small museum in Kansas, a reminder that kindness can echo louder than any gunfire. The medics, the nurses, the stretcher bearers, they rarely appear in war documentaries. No medals, no glory, no fame, but they carried something far greater: the power to save even their enemies. Every bandage wrapped, every wound stitched, every life saved was a silent act of rebellion against the hatred that war tried to spread. They didn't fight with rifles. They fought with mercy. And history owes them a salute. When we look back at World War II, we often see destruction, the battles, the bombs, the broken cities. But in the middle of that darkness, stories like these shine like stars in a moonless night. Stories of soldiers who laid down their hatred, of doctors who healed those who once tried to kill them, of enemies who became friends. And maybe that's the lesson time wanted us to remember, that real strength is not in how hard you fight, but in how deeply you can forgive. The war was over, but the memories never truly ended. For many former German POWs, life after returning home was not easy. They were met with silence, ruins, and shame. Yet, among the ashes, some carried a strange kind of hope, a belief born not on the battlefield, but in an American hospital tent. They remembered the faces of the medics who saved them, and the kindness that had rewritten what they once thought they knew about the enemy. For some, that memory became the seed of a new life. Years later, many of those former POWs became voices for peace. In schools and universities, they spoke not of glory, but of humanity. One such man, Heinrich Bauer, a former German sergeant, traveled across Germany sharing a message few expected to hear. If thou wantest to see what honor looks like, look at the man who saves thee, not the one who kills thee. His words inspired generations who had grown up hearing only about enemies and revenge. In 1959, an extraordinary reunion took place in Pennsylvania. Former German POWs who had been treated there during the war were invited back, not as prisoners, but as guests. They walked the same halls where their wounds had been treated 15 years earlier. Old American doctors, now gray-haired, welcomed them with smiles and tears. One POW recognized the medic who had saved his arm. They shook hands, then embraced. Two old men, once enemies, now brothers in peace. The crowd fell silent. No speech was needed. That hug said everything. Decades later, historians uncovered forgotten diaries from both sides. American medics who had written about enemy soldiers who thanked them, and German POWs who wrote about Americans who healed with gentle hands. In one journal, a U.S. nurse named Margaret Wilson wrote, "They came to us afraid, expecting punishment, but by the time they left, they said thank you in broken English. I will never forget their eyes. They looked human again." And from a German POW diary, "We entered their tents as prisoners. We left as men who understood mercy." Time moved on. The soldiers became fathers, then grandfathers, but they never forgot. Many told their children not stories of hate, but of compassion. They spoke of American doctors who saved them, of kindness that came from those they were taught to destroy. One man, now an old grandfather in Munich, told his grandson, "The enemy saved my life. Promise me thou wilt never let hate decide yours." And the boy nodded, not realizing that simple promise would carry the weight of a century. Today, most of those men and women are gone, but their stories live on, in the letters they wrote, in the photographs preserved in dusty boxes, and in the quiet peace they left behind. History often remembers who fired the first shot, but it rarely remembers who offered the first hand. The story of the German POWs who couldn't believe how Americans treated their wounds is not just about war. It's about redemption, empathy, and the courage to be kind when the world was cruel. As long as their story is told, we remember that compassion is not weakness. It's the greatest strength of all. Thank you for watching this untold chapter of World War II. If thou believe history should remember not only those who fought, but also those who healed, then share this story. Subscribe for more forgotten human stories from the war. Because behind every headline of destruction, there was always someone choosing kindness.